All right, so part of the timing belt kit, you're going to want to do the water pump as well. So now that we have this out, what we're going to do is take off this back cover. So there are three 13mm bolts. There's one right here, and then one on the outside of the case down here on the bottom, which you can't see. And then there's some 8mm bolts. There's one here, 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 and here. Probably have to get a hammer and tap it out probably. So once you get those out, you'll be able to get this cover off. And keep in mind, you only have to do this if you're replacing the water pump, which we are replacing. So that is the block. As you can see, aluminum, iron. This is next. And the water pump is actually this guy right here. All right, we got to get this bolt off right there, which is an 8mm. 8mm hex or Allen, however you prefer. Good old school brute force strength. And we got another one down here. This is a 13mm. We do have a connector back here. Just pop that clip off. Should be able to get this up out of the way here so we can see what we're doing. There's the water pump. So we got a couple of bolts here to take off. Those appear to be 10mm. All right, so off of the water pump. All that is what a pump is supposed to look like. Instructions, we don't need those, we're guys. So watch YouTube videos. Alright, so we got the new water pump in. We got the new gasket on there. Just tightening it in place. These bolts right here are going into aluminum, so you don't have to necessarily crank them down with like brute force strength here. You just need to get them snug. And that's it. Any more than that, and you risk having to replace the rear of the housing too. If you guys plan on doing your thermostat at this point, this is the time to do it. The thermostat housing is actually right here, and there's a upgraded thermostat housing that you can purchase, and we may be doing a video on that in the future, where you're going to replace this whole thing. So if you plan on doing that, now is the time to do it. You can replace this whole unit now. It's easy to get to with the viscous heater out of the way at the same time you're doing your water pump. Alright, we're just reinstalling the viscous heater. We have a new gasket for here, so just popping this old one off. It's all dry and hard. I would just make sure you line up each hole. That's the most important part. If you don't have a hole there, you're not going to get the screw in. Yeah, there we go. So we just want to get the cover back on. There are 5 8mm bolts up at the very top here, and then there are 3 13mm bolts. You got one here, one here, one here. Put those back in. Don't need to go crazy on these. They're going into aluminum, so you don't want to tighten these down too much. Just snug them up. Okay, so we got our tool holder, cam pulley holder in place now. We're just going to tighten these bolts back down here. Now you want to make sure that you don't put any pressure on the gear. So that's what the idea of this is. And you can see here we got a couple of marks there lined up. So that'll help us to hold it in place. Now this one's nice and tight in place. We need to do the same thing on this side. Line up your marks so you have the proper amount of teeth in between the two gears. And then we'll tighten this one down. Alright, we got these torqued down. We got them lined up. Next is the idler pulleys, and these are reverse thread, so you have to take them out to put them in. On here. And you don't need to smash these down either. There's bearings right there, so just get them nice and snug. Make sure that these still spin freely. Alright, so time for the timing belt tensioner. Now it's off-centered, so you may have to do a little weird finagling to get this going, but maybe stand it off from the block a little bit as you get it started. And then once you have the screw started, you want to just get it up in there. This spring should stop against this little lever right there. And then you don't want to tighten this down all the way right now because we're going to need to get in there with the tensioner tool. put in those holes right there to adjust this the way we need to. So that goes in there, and then we can move this back and forth the way we need to adjust it. So for right now, just leave that loose. Then we can snake this Gates timing belt on here. You also want to make sure that you don't have this slack. If you see this up here, you have way too many teeth. That's not going to work. So we need to get those teeth out of there. And we'll show it to you when it's all on. Don't start your vehicle right after you put the timing belt in. You want to check it first. Put something on your crank and just spin this over 3 or 4 times. Make sure that it turns all the way around without anything hitting before you start the car. Starting is the second step. First, we're just going to like go around and make sure that we have free and clear movement and no hitting or anything. So we can feel we have some sort of compression, which is cool. Don't let your key be in the run position when you do this. You could accidentally start the car. Doesn't that be something? And then the other thing that's a good idea, once you get it all the way around, a couple times, line it back up and make sure your lines still line up. And keep in mind that the crank and the cams do not turn at the same amount of RPM, so you'll have to go and a couple times to get the cams to line back up. All right, so we got the timing belt all on here. We got our marks lined up on our injection pump, which we marked down previously. We have our crank lined up here, which we also marked previously. Now, something to note is you might end up with weird tension and weird loose things in the process when you're putting this on in different places. So one of the things you can do, depending on where you're seeing your tension or your marks aren't lining up right, is you can take the tensioner back off and give yourself a little bit of slack so you can get the pulley. Like this one right here will spin freely. So if you don't have this on, it'll just spin in there freely. And you can get your teeth over where you need to by removing the tensioner. Now getting the tensioner on is a little tricky. The best way to do it is to use your 21 millimeter on here and kind of get this pushed down so you know that the teeth are in there, and then rock it back and forth just a little bit. Even though you have the pins in there, you'll still have a little bit of like leeway to move back and forth. That way you can get the correct tension in here, and that's about what you want. Something like that. And then once you have on and the tensioner's in place and your marks are all lined up, you can go ahead and take your pins out, and I would spin this around several times with a hand wrench just to make sure and double check that you're good. Don't forget to take out all 3 pins. Don't forget the one in the flywheel as well. So we got it, the pins out, and we're going to turn this over. Disregard these marks up here. These were errors in my part apparently, because even though I had these marks the way I did, I was still able to run a pin all the way down on both sides. So I'm going to go based off of the pin and not off of my bad marks. If you have any questions, the pin is always right. Okay, so we went around like 2 revolutions all the way around. All the lines lined back up, minus these ones, obviously. These are the ones that we're looking at, and these ones are the ones we're looking at here. These ones are off a tooth, as you can see, so that was my fault. You can see we got it lined back up again. Now we went all the way around. And it's not just the one. You want to make sure you want to check them all. And you can actually see what this looks like. So if you're not in the hole, I'll show you what it looks like. If you're trying to put this in and you're not in the right spot, it starts to catch, but it won't go any further. It'll start to catch, and then you just can't, you barely catch any threads there. But when you're in the right spot, and be able to run it all the way right down to the head. All right, so before we do anything, we're just going to make sure we get the tension right on this tensioner before we start it. So what you're going to want to do is get your tensioner on there, depending on what it looks like. Make sure your 10 millimeter here is loose, and then just get that up there, like right around there. And then tighten this down. There you go. Everything looks good in here. Yeah, everything looks good, and it sounds good too. So after our initial run for about 10 seconds there, our tensioner loosened up a little bit. And it feels good all the way around. It's maybe a little bit loose in some spots, but overall, I don't want this to, jump a tooth or anything. So I'm going to make sure that I readjust that. And maybe a reason I've seen some people with, 200 miles after a timing belt job, they have dropped valves or, all kinds of weird problems acting like a broken timing belt. So maybe you want to just take a double check about this when you do your timing belt too. Make sure that it's not the cause of those problems. All right, well, now begins the fun process of putting everything back together again. And we're going to do just that. All right, this is the next part to go back in after you get your timing belt all back together. Got the tensioner on and everything, so goodbye, timing belt. See you in 6 years or 100,000 miles, whichever comes first. All right, cover goes back on next. You have 17 of these little bolts, 7 millimeters. All right, we didn't get the Serpentine belt tensioner. It's not too hard to get to actually replace this. Ours spins freely, but as you can see, it's pretty rusty, and it's going to tear up. This actually rides along the outside of the belt, on the outside of the Serpentine belt. So I'm going to try and clean it off a little bit so it doesn't destroy the brand new belt we're about to put on the car. I think that's a lot better. All right, this goes in next. There's 2 little holes that these indent into. They're like indication holes. Make sure that you get this in the right spot. And it goes on right down here. All right, next up we have the fan idler pulley. And we're just tightening this. And we got 4 13 millimeter bolts. And then you got 1 down here inside the pulley. Don't forget about that one. That's the long one. All right. Next thing you're going to want to do is just replace these little caps here on the side where you had your pins. Don't lose the washers. And then you got the other one on the passenger side too. Obviously we got to get these tightened down still. So there's not one in the back. That one doesn't have a cap on it. All right, we're going to put the alternator back in. If you started the Jeep up, just redisconnect the battery. You don't want to short anything out or kill yourself or whatever. Alternator goes back in down here. Now, there's these 2 bolts right here that you may have loosened. I did not. All right, so we're just going to tighten this down. And it is a 15 millimeter. This piece isn't a requirement, but I might put my engine cover back on someday, so we'll see. Yeah, this is one of the idler pulleys for the Serpentine belt, and it's pretty beat up too. I also didn't order these, so I'm going to try and clean these up a little bit as well. Next we got our pulleys here. We got one going over here. And these are reverse threads, so keep that in mind when you can't screw these in. And the other reverse thread right here. Alright, and these are 16s. Don't forget to go the right way, which is the wrong way, but you know what I mean. Alright, and these are all 10 millimeter bolts down here. Alright, we got these in. Just need to tighten them down. Alright, we're going to do the power steering pump one next. I stuck an extension in here just so that way when I tighten it down it doesn't loosen up or move or spin around or anything. So now, in order to get this up over this, it's never going to reach. As you can see here, I got it as tight as I can get it pretty much, and I can't get it over. You need to loosen the tension on the tensioner. So get a wrench on there, and as you can see when you tighten it, it gives you extra, and then you can get it up on there. Alright, time to put the fan back on, which is the last major engine component here. Close enough, that's tight, we're good. Alright, so we need to get a 13 millimeter in here so that way we can loosen this up. But Rather tighten it down. Don't forget to take the nut out of there. The bolt, the socket. Yeah, that. Alright guys, so that's the major engine components back together. Obviously, we still don't have an intercooler, radiator, and stuff like that, or the front end back together. Go ahead and click right here. We'll have a video for that as well. It's not required to take the whole front end apart. It does make it a little bit easier to film for us to show you guys where everything is. And this was our first time doing the timing belt on the Jeep, so we wanted to really be able to see what we were getting ourselves into. We got this timing belt kit from Sasquatch Parts. I bought it myself, but it is a high-quality kit, and if you are doing a timing belt or anything on your Jeep, definitely check them out. Like, comment, and subscribe for more, and we will see you guys next time.